Are you ready to become a change maker? Our 48-week postgraduate program in public policy or the PGP may be just the thing for you. This hybrid program is designed to give you both the theoretical foundation and hands-on experience needed to excel in policy making. With a mix of expert-led webinars, in-person workshops, and policy simulation exercises, you'll gain real-world skills along with personalized mentorship. Through our policy programs, we connect good people to good ideas and good networks. Apply now at the link in the description to make an impact.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, I'm Sarthak and I welcome you to All Things Policy. In the last few weeks, there have been various debates about India's current innovation capacities compared to other economies. For instance, where does India stand with respect to AI, artificial intelligence? Also, another instance, an interesting observation made by a tech entrepreneur that Indian firms do not create enough value through IPs as compared to more innovative, advanced economies. One of the factors that propels, fosters, facilitates innovation is the research and development funding ecosystem. And of course, a few days back, the union budget was also presented in the parliament. So in this episode, we will discuss how the union government's budget allocates resources for R&D and discuss whether these investments are aligned with India's long-term priorities. Joining me for this episode is my colleague Shambhavi. Shambhavi heads research at Takshashila and is the chairperson of the Advanced Biology program. Hi, Shambhavi.
Hello, everyone. Hey, Sarthak.
Yeah, so Shambhavi, before we go into each of these line items of the union budget, could you just explain what should be the role of government in R&D? What is typically the role of government in R&D? What should be the role of government in R&D?
Right. So there are multiple roles that the government can play, right? It can obviously fund a lot of the R&D. And typically in more developed countries, you will see that the government contribution to overall R&D spend is lesser than what we see in the private sector. But that, I think, has also been an outcome of sustained government funding for a long time that has allowed the private sector to spin off, to raise its own money, to innovate, be able to then put money back into R&D. So I think that's a very mature R&D ecosystem that exists. In other places, obviously, the government funds a lot more of the R&D, and so is also the case in India. You typically see figures of 0.6%, 0.8% as what India on its own as a country spends on R&D. And this has come up across economic service, etc. But it's very difficult to find out where that figure really comes from in the actual budget. So when you go and sit and look at Ministry of Science and Technology or look at Ministry of Health, and all of these have research budgets within it, it's a little difficult to find out what all is encompassed in the 0.65%. But funding obviously is one of the crucial aspects, and the other is obviously it can help with policy regulations so that it incentivizes R&D across the private sector. Research as a endeavor is extremely risky, right? Because it is bound to fail. And only some companies, if they're investing in research, will actually create a product that can be commercialized and translated into products, right? Research also sometimes is just a pursuit of pure knowledge with no end goal in terms of money as a target, right? And that is what the government or society really needs to fund as well. So basically two things there.
Yeah, so since you mentioned research is pursuit of knowledge, and knowledge is something which can percolate throughout society, right? If a private firm is also trying to create new knowledge, they stand to benefit because of that. But at the same time, the society also benefits. For instance, firm A is doing some research, they have found out something, and another firm, another individual wants to carry out research. They don't need to start from scratch. They can build on something that firm A has already created. So in economics, we'll say that research has massive positive externalities, right? Yeah. Spillover effects are there. And this is also the reason why governments typically fund R&D. Generally, there is this, right?
And just on that, a particular spill effect that we have never been able to really put a number on or a metric on is the development of scientific temper that comes
Yeah.
from pursuit of knowledge, like the real, like, we want to understand why something is happening. That I think is a positive externality that is often overlooked when you
Yeah.
think of budget and ROI, etc. Knowledge is, I think, a bit more quantifiable. Building on knowledge is a bit more quantifiable, but the other social skill that comes from building knowledge is far enriching.
So if I have to summarize, so sometimes governments directly do R&D. I mean, there will be different government-funded institutions, public institutions, which carry out R&D. It's completely funded by the government. There might be instances where the private players are being incentivized by the government to carry out R&D. It can be in terms of maybe some subsidies or some grants, or can be some advance purchase agreements. And the third kind of method is where the private players are themselves doing R&D, right? And you have an intellectual property system in place, and the government basically enforces these laws. Again, an associated question here, since you mentioned about it might be difficult to quantify. So generally, how do we measure the success benefits of government spending on R&D? Is there any way out there?
That is very difficult. I know, for example, Australia has a framework to look at research impact, and they are now doing an exercise to update that framework because they don't think their framework is currently adequate enough to understand that. Finland is another country which has a research impact framework. It's really difficult to quantitate the spillover effects of doing research. So it is not easy to say that, I've put in X amount of money in the kitty and
I'll get
I'll
returns
get it
worth.
back. And I think that even the worst thing about doing it is trying to put a metric on it, because and I'm sure we'll talk about this eventually. For most people, for most scientists, the outcome would be what they see as outcomes as publications, and I think that just takes us down a rabbit hole that we shouldn't really go down. But I'm sure we'll discuss about this later.
Definitely. So I was asking this question because, again, since we talk about the union budget spending, should the government be expecting some returns? Anyway, so let's move to the union budget part. Right. So one macro question before we go into each of these line items. What are your thoughts on the current union's R&D budget, the 2024-25 budget?
I have written, and so have many others, and I mean, this is a overall understood characteristic of the Indian budget, is that we underspend on R&D. Right? We have always criticized that that the spending on R&D has to be more, especially because we have an ambition of being a global scientific leader, and if we don't actually put in enough investment in R&D, it's very difficult for us to innovate and be the pioneers of science in the world. This union budget actually this government over the past couple of years has tried to bring in this recognition that R&D is critical to India's development. And you have seen this in form of various missions. We have seen it in form of various R&D initiatives. And this current budget actually allocates a lot more money to at least the Ministry of Science and Technology, which is the pet area that I always like to look at, for R&D purposes, right? So many schemes, the Vidyan Dhara, for example, which are subsuming some of the other schemes, have an increased budget. The Department of Biotechnology has received more money. The Department of Science and Technology has actually received way more money, and most of it is meant for spurring on private research. But still, there has been a substantial increase in the R&D allocation. Obviously, how much that translates into how much budget gets used up, etc., is are things we can only talk about next year. But I felt very optimistic looking at the numbers this time, because there has been signs of recognition of R&D's importance, and there have been steps to at least allocate more funding at the beginning of the budget. So overall, I feel a bit more optimistic about where we are.
Yeah, thanks for this. And since you mentioned that it has been allocated, this much amount of money has been allocated, but there is always a possibility that it might not get spent. So to our listeners, I just want to add one thing here. In any budget document, you will find the outlay for the upcoming fiscal year, but you also get an idea about the revised estimates of the previous year and also the actual spending that happened last to last year, right? So you can always compare how much was the budgetary outlay last year and what are the revised estimates, or what are and you can also compare with the actual expenditure, and many times you will see a divergence. So I think that is what you are implying, right? Maybe the outlay is there, but next year you'll get to know that the revised estimates were slightly lower, and next year you'll get to know that the actual expenditure was way off.
Yeah, I mean, and this is something I've classically seen with at least the departments under the Ministry of Science and Tech, that they will underutilize their budgets. And I mean, scientists across the country will be in uproar that we are funding less, but even from that less funding, we are not being able to utilize all of it, which hints to, I think, a more systemic problem that needs to be addressed. And these are numbers which will vary from 30% to 60% of the budget being underutilized. I think the only time in recent history where I've seen optimal use of budget was the Department of Biotechnology using its budget during COVID-19, which was obviously a pandemic situation. It was, all gears on for the pandemic response, and the DBT was tasked with, vaccine manufacturing and diagnostics creation. And so I think that was the only time where where budgets were actually optimally used.
In fact, this is not something unique to ministries concerning R&D, because I remember I was just looking at 2022-23 data, actual expenditure, and what was the budgetary outlay in 22-23, and I found out that I just looked at some 100 plus line items which constitute the budget, and out of that, around 65%, there was this deviation of more than 10%. I mean, whatever is the budgetary outlay, 65% where the actual expenditure was either 10% higher or it was 10% lower. Only around 35% was plus minus 10 range. So usually there is a wide variation. And many instances you will find that the spending is lower than what was allocated. Now coming to the line items, right? So there have been some major announcements made by the finance minister. Some of these announcements were made in the previous years as well. And let's see what has happened over there. For instance, I think 2 years back, the NRF, National Research Foundation, right, that was announced by the finance minister, and it is still there. So what is happening over there? Has it kicked off?
Yeah, so
in fact, what is the objective over there? And it will be better to...
It started off as NRF, I think, in 2020. And there was an initial allocation made there to the Principal Scientific Advisor's Office. But then eventually, when they passed the act that would control the working of this foundation, it was the Anusandhan National Research Foundation, so ANRF, governed by the Department of Science and Technology. It is supposed to be a game changer initiative that is supposed to spur infrastructure development in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and be really blue sky research, that would put India on the map of science and tech. So it's supposed to do both of these objectives. The plan was to allocate 50,000 crores over 5 years. As the first time it was announced back, I think 2019, 2020, that was the talk, 50,000 crores for R&D over 5 years. So about 10,000 crores every year. When the act was actually passed and when we had a roadmap, what the government said that was that from the government funding, we will get 2,000 crores for ANRF, 800 crores, which was being given to SERB, which is a different scheme, the Science and Engineering Research Board. So that will continue under the ANRF bracket. So that's 2,800 crores. And roughly 7,000 crores will be raised from the private sector, so from non-governmental sources. And I still don't know whether there's actual roadmap to do this, to raise that money. And we don't know whether any money has been raised on that particular front so far, right? After the budget of 2023-24, there was 2,000 crores allocated that the government had said they would allocate for ANRF. But that was eventually revised down to 258 crores. But no meetings of the ANRF board were actually held. The first meeting was held in September 2024, and which meant that the actual spend in the year 2023-24 was zero. Because there were just no initiatives to spend money on. The 800 crores for the sub board were still allocated and those were spent, but nothing for the 2023-24 ANRF component. Last year, again, they announced 2,000 crores. So that 2,000 crores has remained consistent. The fact that they allocate 2,000 crores has remained consistent over the 3 years.
But the spending doesn't happen.
But the spending doesn't happen. Again, the revised budget that we have for last year is 200 crores. But there were some schemes that were announced. 2 of them were announced in late November, post the board's meeting. And so there would be some actual spend that we will only get to know in due time. But and again, this year they have allocated 2,000 crores for ANRF. But after those few schemes that were announced, we're still to hear of any new endeavors that the ANRF is supposed to sponsor. And this, I think, is it's really disappointing because there's clearly political will, right? We have announced this scheme, we have allocated money for the scheme, but there seems to be other challenges in getting the scheme actually off the road. One of the things that I think might be problematic is the committee itself is such high level. The PM chairs the committee, etc. I can just understand that it will take time to get all of these people on board to actually have that committee meet and get things rolling. And this might be one of the reasons why the first meeting was delayed up till September 2024, despite we knowing about this scheme from 2020. And I think there has to be some sort of systemic changes that need to happen to get the bureaucracy online to make sure that if there is political will. The research is not going to wait for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Other countries are just going to do the research anyways. And if we announce something, but we have to wait for money to come in, that delay doesn't help researchers at all. In fact, it will hurt them really badly. So that's on the government side of funding, and we have absolutely no idea about the private sector funding. When it's going to come, whether it's going to come, how it will be spent, who will actually,
Yeah, but I have a question related to that, right? Why will they be part of it, right? Why will someone be willing to invest part of that 7,000 crores? They might as well do it on their own, right? Why should they put the money in that foundation unless it is a philanthropic organization and all? And in that case, also, what is the incentive for them to give it to a government body, right? Maybe they can directly sponsor a researcher or an institution.
Yeah, in fact, I think when the ANRF idea was first being explored, this was our question as well. That if the belief is that there is that much money in the private sector to spend on R&D, that they are not spending on R&D, and this is true. We know from a lot of studies that India's private sector does not spend as much money on R&D as other countries do, right? And this is across sectors. Then the question is, how do you incentivize to put more money into themselves, right? Why is R&D not something that is appealing to these people? It clearly means that they have other options which are more attractive.
Yeah.
And unless we make investment into R&D more attractive, there's no reason why companies would do that. And perhaps it would have been better for the government to explore what some of those options might be, because this is really difficult.
And also you mentioned one thing, right? The focus of NRF was to leverage tier 2, tier 3 cities. Again, so I have a broader question. Can this be done? Tier 2, tier 3 cities, can you get good quality research output from there? My assumption is in tier 1 cities, you might have better resources. There might be clustering of ideas. Those agglomeration effects, right? Since a lot of people are here, and that exchange of ideas and all those things can, and the infrastructure also, right? Maybe better in tier 1 cities. So tier 2, tier 3 cities, are they?
Yeah, so this is a tough question. We keep on saying that India has such a large population of graduates who we don't know what we're going to do with. We want to be a science leader, so we want to effectively use this pool, with a bit of training to be able to generate more ideas. Not everything has to be a blue sky project, but it would be nice to be doing, things more for the domestic market as well, perhaps, And when ANRF first came about, this idea that we want to build scale, that agglomeration effects, even in smaller cities, was quite appealing.
Okay.
And we had suggested some ideas on how we could do this. We had suggested that, let private companies who want to, say, build facilities, say, in a tier 2 city, the government can give them matching grants to be able to do that, so that the private sector company not only provides the infrastructure, but also then jobs, the training that is required, with some help from the government, right? Or this doesn't actually also have to be just the union government. It can also be the state governments which say that, okay, look, this particular spot has this biodiversity that is appealing, that we can make use of. So let's get a private company to sponsor some of the infrastructure building. We can put in some money, and we build a facility there that can use that biodiversity, train people, give jobs, etc. So it is doable. It is definitely also, I mean, we do need to increase the clusters that we have.
Yeah, and also it should include universities and all those
Yeah.
things, which again
Yeah.
might not be there in tier 3 cities, maybe.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah. So to do all of this, we had thought about different ways in which ANRF can pool money and create more value for the money that they're investing in.
yeah.
But we still, I mean, there might be a roadmap that the government knows, but it's just not publicly shared, and we know.
Yeah, and again, the spending right now doesn't elicit a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and I don't know where the spending will even reflect. I mean, if they raise
Yeah.
private money, I don't know where it reflects in the budget and how we can analyze it better.
Yeah.
Right.
So another thing about access to science is the One Nation, One Subscription thing, right? Which was announced this year. The idea is access to journals will be easy. What about that? Does it find mention in the budget? How much is allocated? I know this is a question I'm intentionally asking because I saw you asking others on Twitter.
Okay, One Nation, One Subscription was a initiative that was first talked about in the National Education Policy 2019, I think. I first saw it in the Science, Technology, Innovation Policy draft of 2020. The idea, and then it was an idea that India will basically, the Indian government will basically negotiate with publishers so that all Indians get access to journals and scientific knowledge that is published under peer-reviewed journals. And I think that is still the intended goal of ONOS. In the first phase, they have only opened it up to 30 publishers and 1.8 crore students and faculties who are affiliated with different universities and research institutions. Right? I have a lot of concern about this idea of equating peer-reviewed journal articles with knowledge, but I leave that aside for now, and we'll focus
that's a different discussion.
And we'll focus on the budget part of it. So it was announced that there will be a 6,000 crore grant for this allocation for this budget for 3 years, and we were going under the assumption that it's going to be 2,000 crores per year. Part of it for actual subscriptions, part of it for paying authors who want to publish in an open access mode. So I was quite excited to see where where does ONOS fit in, how much money has actually been allocated. Also, what is the expectation from the output budget for this, right? Unfortunately, I could not find ONOS anywhere in the budget document, neither under the Ministry of Education, where I think it should be, not under the Ministry of Science and Tech. And I think you have, Sarthak, looked at the entire budget, so all the line items. So we actually don't know where it fits in. We know it has been implemented because they have a website, and institutions can, who are affiliated with the government can actually access papers. But we just don't know how much was spent, and we don't know what is the outcome that they're expecting from that spend.
So in fact, this is a question or asking for help to our listeners. In case you are able to figure it out from the union budget, please let us know. We'll be happy to know more about it. Also, there was another announcement by the finance minister. She announced that some 20,000 crore corpus will be created. 20,000 crore corpus will be there with the Department of Science and Technology, and the department will be allocating 0 to low interest loans for private sector research.
For 50 years.
Oh, it was for 50 years?
For 50 years.
So what are your thoughts on this? And again, why is the Department of Science and Technology giving these loans?
Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, this department, when you look at the Department of Science and Technology's budget over the last many years, we have done this exercise for 4 years, I think. This is our 5th year we are doing this. And 7,000 crores, 6,000 crores, 5,000 crores, then with the ANRF being given to DST, it went to 7,000 crores. And this year, suddenly, it goes to 27,000 crores because of this 20,000 crore corpus allocation. I don't know whether this 20,000 crores is the first installment, because when the finance minister had first spoken about this loan scheme in the interim budget last year, she had said 1 lakh crore corpus. So I don't know if this is the first in a 5-year corpus loan, or whether this is it. That is not clear yet. But again, it is striking to me that it has gone to the Department of Science and Technology, which funds a lot of government-led research. And now we are asking to also fund competition. Right? You are saying that we want to increase private sector funding, but we want a government agency that actually does its own research to also fund this, which to me there's a conflict of interest there.
Yeah.
B, there's a conflict of ideas with the ANRF, because with the ANRF you are saying that there is private sector money that we want to pool into research, 7,000 crores of it every year, which perhaps has not happened. And again, we don't know. We are assuming it has not happened. But here you are saying that the private sector also might be aided with some infusion of funding. And therefore, we are going to allocate this corpus, which will be given out as loans. So this is not grants, this is actually loans. But still, there is some, and both of them are being handled by the same agency. So it's a little, in my head, it's a little confusing on, what exactly are the problems that ail the private sector in India in funding more R&D. But anyways, let us assume that perhaps the problem is that it doesn't have enough money, and therefore these loans are the way forward. As we said right at the beginning, like research is very, very risky. So I really don't know how a startup which is just starting out would take a loan. What happens if it fails? For a lot of the other instruments, banking instruments, for example, or philanthropy, or when it comes to VCs, angel investors, those instruments of recovering the money or foregoing that money are quite clear. I mean, there's a strategy with which a VC will back you, right? Or an angel investor
They're
will
in
back
that
you.
business, they know about it.
Yeah, they know, and they will do multiple startups with a strategy that, okay, at least one of them will succeed and I'll get my money back from, that I've spent on all 9, right? Does the DST really have that capacity to do that kind of thinking? I'm not sure. I mean, again, if you think about the underutilization of budgets, capacity within government agencies does seem to be poor, right? And so if you want to do this, I would say give it to some financial instrument that knows how to do this better. But B, if you want to do it within the government, you first need to create capacity within that agency to be actually able to allocate and recover loans. I mean, the government is not supposed to be, at least the DST is not supposed to be recovering loans. So that that for me is very, very weird. Again, and we want to be funding cutting edge research, right? I mean, we want to be funding research that delivers. And therefore, that 50-year time horizon for returning a loan is something that I really don't understand. Except if the government is thinking that these are going to be big ticket items, right? So people are going to take like 10 crores of loan and therefore they're given 50 years time to return it. But the maths doesn't add up, right? The maths really doesn't. Yeah, I struggle with that maths. So again, we don't know what ticket items they're looking at, what kind of research they want to give out loans to.
I have another concern with this, right? So since they're giving loans to the private sector, there is always this risk of the way they're using their discretion. There is a possibility that a particular kind of player might be preferred. Also, there is a possibility that some people will game the system, especially the large players. They know how to do all these things better than the smaller ones. So government having more power, more authority in granting these loans might be risky.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that, for example, right now the government spent a lot of money in creating this Genome India database, right? It's a database of the genetic signatures of about 10,000 people. And it was supposed to be publicly available, but what they have said right now is that if you want to access it, you have to collaborate. As a private company, you have to collaborate with a Department of Biotechnology institution to actually access it. So the worst thing that can happen with these loans is they will say, okay, as a private company, if you want to take a loan, you have to work with a DST institution or another government institution to be able to apply for this loan.
And then it can lead to a host of other issues.
So I really don't understand why this has to be housed within the DST.
Yeah, I mean, if access to finance, capital, all these things was an issue, then definitely there can be other ways to do this. But yeah, I don't know what is the rationale for this.
This is very characteristic of, I mean, even during COVID, you saw that the ICMR got like saddled with all sorts of things. And so we seem to be going into this idea that if there's a competent agency, we just give them more stuff to do.
Yeah.
Whether it's in conflict with what they're actually already doing, whether there are other agencies which are doing the same functions, it doesn't really matter. We will just continue to, you find the kid who does the most diligent work, and then you're like, okay.
Another aspect here is the moral hazard thing also, right? In case, as you were mentioning, the research involves a lot of risk. There is a possibility that things will fail, uh, so result will be they are not going to repay the loans. It might lead to a situation where other firms also which get these money, they also don't repay it. And how do you hold them accountable? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't do that. So so again, from the accountability aspect,
It is really strange. I mean, I would have really preferred if the government had said that, look, we have 20,000 crores. We will back any VC consortium that matches us, brings in 20,000 crores. Let's create a vehicle where we have a 40,000 crore ka grant that we will give out to private R&D in the country, and the VCs can run.
Yeah, they have skin in the game in that case.
And they can run because they have the capacity to understand how to fund really good quality research. And then the government can make its money back as well. This is what the Israeli government did when they were setting up their biotech ecosystem, right? That this is the money you bring in. They brought in foreign VCs as well because they thought that their VCs did not have enough understanding of the biotech ecosystem in Israel to actually back, because again, biotech projects are high, long gestation periods, extremely risky. So they brought in experts who could actually look at the government. And you can, if you talk to any private startup or company in India who applies for loans to the government and or schemes, not loans, grants. So the Department of Biotech has a scheme called BIG, the Biotech Ignition Grant. You will mostly hear people say, look, they put on academic experts as evaluation committee members, and they don't understand what the private sector is doing because the goals of the private sector, which is to make money, is very different from the goals of the academic sector, which is to, that pursuit of knowledge thing. And so they want mechanisms and they want all of these experiments to, show how the science really works. And the private sector is like, no, we know that it works. And let us make us money so that we can then do the research to find out how it works. But if you say that you have to first show it how it works, I don't have the money for it. Right? And obviously I'm cherry picking ideas here.
Yeah.
But this is what I have mostly seen.
Okay.
So yeah, I have a lot of issues with this DST.
So again, the accountability or how to hold these firms which are getting loans accountable is an issue. But yeah, so the union budget also has some mechanisms to at least give us an idea about what it will achieve out of the money that is spending, right? So there is this outcome budget which is released along with the budget. So when it comes to the R&D budget, how did you get a chance to see the outcomes that the government
I did. And I mean, this has been a classical, again, trouble that I've had with the Ministry of Science and Tech's outcome-output budgets, right? Because they put publications as an outcome, and publication is really an output.
Yeah.
But anyways, I guess they wanted some metrics there, and it makes more sense to make publications. What struck me when I went through it this time is the number of, so every line item in the budget usually gets some outcome outputs in the outcome output matrix, right? The number of times I saw publications as an outcome, right? 1311 publications for some scheme, 800 publications for another scheme. And like really odd numbers as well, like 1311, like
very
I was
specific.
Like, so someone has done some maths there that, okay, this much money, this many years, this many institutions, 2 per scientist or something like that, and we'll get like really odd numbers. But 1311 I thought was very interesting. Anyways, I am always afraid whenever publications is put as a target, because we have this really bad experience when the Ministry of Education did this, right? For university professors to get tenure or to get promotions, they had to show some sort of publications. And in that time period, we saw a huge rise in predatory journals. We saw really low quality research being done just to get that publication so that it would go on somebody's CV and they could get their tenure. And so this idea, even for One Nation, One Subscription, in the press briefing that was done, the intended target was shown to be publications in 3 years' times, right? And that, I think, I find it very problematic. It's not that I have a better metric to judge the research funding on, but to set that as a target and to set numbers as a target for publications without any measure of what quality of publications, for example, then that becomes a real problem, because then we'll just have a lot of, people are trying to breach that 1,000 publication target instead of thinking, hey, I'll have 100 really good quality publications. Uh, and instead saying, look, I need 1,000, so let me get 1,000 whichever way I get 1,000. So perhaps even in publications to say that, we'll go for high impact or something like that.
That might be better.
That might have been a better idea. In terms of, and the DST perhaps is not the correct agency for this. But look at patents, which they do, but again, how many of those patents were actually commercialized?
Yeah.
Not just look at number
Or
of
else
patents.
again the same thing will
Again,
happen.
the same problem. And we have seen this happen, right? That, a few years ago, the Indian government said that they would fund Indian patents to a certain extent, right? And we saw like mushrooming of the patent numbers, but nothing really commercializing from there, right? So perhaps even adding qualifiers there might have been helpful. But the problem with the outcome output budget always has been we don't know what actually happened last year.
Yeah.
So while we know in terms of the actual budget, the revised spends, etc., in terms of these metrics
We don't have much
that the
clue.
ministries put out every year saying that this is what we want to reach, we actually don't know what gets done.
Yeah, so that's again, for a very long time, there have been suggestions that we should have some form of audit or something to see where
Yeah.
we stand. But yeah, that has not happened.
Yeah, I mean, publications, for example, is for in a year it is very difficult to actually get the publication out. I mean, we know that the funding won't come immediately. And to go from getting funding to actually publishing is not going to be that easy in a year. So
Yeah, those who have been in this field will know it better. So yeah, anyway, so this is about the outlay, outcomes, and outputs, and what all happened, or what are the different line items in the budget, and what has been the consequences. Now, what do you think you would have wanted to see in the budget, which was not reflected in the budget? I think some people are talking about R&D tax credits, some changes in that maybe. Apart from that, again, not everything we should be expecting in the budget.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have to increase R&D in India, not everything will be because of allocation, right?
Yeah.
Some other changes are also required. So what are those changes that you would want to see in the next year maybe?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The systemic changes would include the policy, the R&D tax rate, which we had 200%, and then we reduce it to 100%. And things like that will really impact the private sector spending on R&D, right? So you can't make private sector R&D investment really not disincentivize it through doing systemic changes and then say, hey, look, we will fund you instead, like we'll give you loans.
Yeah. In fact, I want to add one thing. So in the past, if firms were engaged in R&D, whatever they're spending, according to that, they were getting tax benefits. And over a period of time, it has been reduced. Now, one interesting aspect of this is, this does not actually give discretionary power to the government. Any firm which is doing R&D will get these benefits, right? As compared to the ones that we discussed, right, where the government is deciding, oh, we'll give loan to these private sectors or grants to this particular firms. Generally, when you do this, there is a high possibility that firms which have been there for a long time, larger firms, they have that expertise. They can hire help who can figure out what to do so that you can get these kind of grants. So it leads to market concentration and all these things. But R&D tax credits is something which actually reduces, which does not create these discretionary powers and benefits everyone. But it has been reduced, might be worth increasing further. But yeah, it has to, maybe one of the reasons why they decreased this is they were not able to figure out whether this is leading to greater R&D spending. If we have ways by which you can measure it, we should.
Yeah, we should. Yeah. And the other thing that I would have really liked is, I'm really glad with the increased funding, right? I'm not going to complain about that at all. There has been a clear sign from the government that we are going to require more R&D, and I'm really appreciative of that. But we really need to up our bureaucratic capacity to handle that money as well. I mean, one of the things that we have seen over the last 4 years and I have seen over the last 10 years that I have been in the Indian academic setup is that people don't get paid on time. Right? And small things like that will go a long way in trying to ensure that scientists who are here will stay here and will happily do their work. And with even the small pots of money that they currently get, able to use it optimally. I mean, right now, if they are trying to figure out if their student gets paid or not, and half of their mind space goes into that, then that's a big loss. And there is definitely a chance of bureaucratic uplift, even to use the money that we have been given right now optimally. And the fact that we are actually increasing that money without increasing the bureaucratic capacity is a big problem. So I was really hoping that we kind of use some of that money into developing better capacities within the government itself, to be able to really appreciate which R&D to fund, the importance of giving that money on time, that we can't wait for a year from sanctioning the money to actually giving the money to an institution, because science doesn't wait for anybody. So that we can't. These are the low hanging fruits that we really cannot lose out on.
So basically, we have to ensure that the system works as such. I mean, and it's not just about one particular allocation of money, right? You need to ensure that the entire ecosystem is fostering innovation, right? It is not just about public institutions doing R&D. It is also about ensuring that the private players are also pitching in, right? We should be able to leverage the capacity of the private players, which we are not doing currently. Any closing thoughts, Shambhavi?
Yeah, so I think optimism all around. And I'm hoping we get a lot more actual budgets spent on R&D. I was a little disappointed that the ANRF's first scheme was on EVs, because we already have a mission. And, I was hoping that for a game-changing sort of initiative that the ANRF is supposed to be, it would be something completely out of the box and, like puts India on the map, like gene editing, which obviously I have a bias to. But still, but I think more bold actions are hopefully coming our way in terms of the money that we are putting in terms of where that money will go. But yeah, hopefully there'll be enough bureaucratic capacity from the time the letter gets signed to, hey, we are allocating this money, to when the money actually goes into the institution's pocket. That I think is the real game changer for the Indian R&D setup.
Thanks, Shambhavi. With this, we'll wrap up our discussion on R&D funding and the union budget. Thanks, Shambhavi, for joining me.
Thanks, Sarthak.
Thanks to the listeners for joining us.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.